This month we were planning to cover March on the smallholding.
But instead we're going to do a special on COVID-19 and how it's affected us, because it really has had a big impact on our lifestyle.
Hello, welcome to English Country Life. Welcome to the garden on a glorious sunny day. Welcome to the COVID-19 special. My name's Hugh.
And my name's Fiona. It's easy to think here on our little small holding that COVID-19 hasn't had an impact on our lifestyle, but it has, and it's had a significant impact on us.
First big way it's changed is our family circumstances. Long before the lockdown we had a look around and we didn't like the way this thing was going. We didn't like the idea of my mum being in her retirement flat quite a long way away from us. So for the duration we've moved her into the small holding.
It's had a big impact on our finances too, both from income that we produce from the property and income that we bring in from external sources. So we've had to make big adjustments as a result.
So all we've really had to do is rethink what we grow, the quantities we grow, the other foods that we produce, to fit in with the notion of the pandemic, the change in family circumstances and the change in income.
We'd like to talk to you in a little bit more detail about each of those impacts. So let's get started. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about finances. Some time ago I published a video called Money in the Smallholder, and I talked about the various income streams we have here. The first was selling eggs at the gate. We're not doing that at the moment, but what we are doing is supporting our friends and neighbours by giving away our excess eggs. We leave them in their porches or on their doorsteps, and sometimes we find a Savoy cabbage in a carrier bag hung on the garden gate, or we find homemade jams by the front door. It's a fantastic support system in this little rural community. At this time of year we would also have been selling fertilised eggs, and that would have meant going back and forth to the post office. Those eggs are for our rare breed Buff Orpington hens, so we did get a reasonable amount of income from that. But we can't do that. In line with government regulations, we're trying not to go out of the property, so we're not going back and forth to the post office. Our biggest income stream though was from working away once a year. I was working about 120 miles away on a project for a client, and due to COVID-19 the project has been suspended, so all of that income we were getting from me working has now gone. What we'd like to do is show you how that's affected what we're doing here and what we're doing in response.
So Fiona's told you about the changes to our financial circumstances, and I've touched on the changes to our family circumstances, but what I want to tell you a little bit about is our mindset right now. So when this all started, long before lockdown, long before self-isolation was any more than an idea, we had a thought that I didn't like the idea of my mum self-isolating in a retirement flat without a garden. So she's come here, and at least here we can self-isolate in a secure way with plenty of outdoor space. But those two sets of things, the fact that our income has dropped, the fact that we have another mouth to feed, has put a lot of pressure on the food we need to produce this year, and we're going to have to work more efficiently than we ever have. We're going to have to press every scrap of land into use. We're going to have to plan rigorously, carefully how we use our vegetable areas so that we have a succession of crops coming through, so that we have plenty of fresh food to eat each day, but also food to preserve to get us through the winter, and even so that we have seeds and tubes and cormers for next year to carry on growing. It's a tough old challenge, and I'm not going to lie, it's taken its toll on me a little bit intellectually that we really have to plan this rigorously. But let me show you what we are thinking, let me show you how we're working and describe what we're doing. Welcome to the veg area. We've got 10 beds, long ones, each 100 square foot, going back that way, and another 2 exactly the same shape going down this side. If you want to know why we've standardised our beds, I recommend our video on designing a vegetable garden. But in effect, we have a number of frames that you can see behind me there in the light green form that we can move from bed to bed to provide protection for things like birds or insects against brassicas, etc. So having a standardised bed means I only have to build a few of those and we can move them around as and when we need. We've planned hard this year because we're going to need the food that we grow more than ever. And we have a plan of what's going where. I'll put it up big on the screen so you can see it, but what I'd like to explain is that everything we're growing is trying to conform to 3 principles. Where possible, we want succession so that we've got plenty of fresh food to eat right through the year. We also though want to produce deliberate gluts of some things some of the time, because when we're going to store those things for the winter, it's very useful to have a decent amount. If we're going to do a canning run, or we're going to freeze a lot, we're going to process a lot, we want to have a reasonable amount to process at one time. And the third principle we're trying to work to is, where possible, we need to be able to produce new plants for ourselves, whether that's seed saving, whether it's layering. But for everything that we grow, if we can, we want to be able to produce replacement plants for future years. So if you like, we'll take a quick walk through each of the beds and I'll show you what we're growing there, why we've arrived at the decisions we have, how we're going to achieve succession, and how we're going to create new plants. Let's take a look. This is our onion bed. I'm going to show you briefly how we've started off a lot of these Rindsberger onions in the greenhouse. These are seed grown onions, a variety that I really like called Rindsberger. Look at the roots coming through on those. Those are more than ready for planting out. This may seem like an empty tray, but it's just germinating. And just here you can see some more Rindsberger onions coming through. So right now I've got last year's Rindsberger onions still edible. I've got some I planted a month ago that are up and strong and ready for planting out. And this set will be my last crop of the year of onions, and these will be the ones that I'll be keeping through until this time next year. So from here to the far end of the bed, we've got spring planted onion sets, and they'll get off to a good start because they'd already put some growth on to create those sets. Almost every other year I've also planted overwintering onion sets, which would be more advanced than these, and last year, for annoying reasons, I didn't do it, and I could really use them this year. We have still got a bunch of onions that we've got from last year's late harvest, so they're Rindsberger onions like these. They mature about October time and they're still going great, although not all of them will keep us going until the early sets go through. They'll sprout, etc. So what I've done is dried a lot of those as well, and we can take a look at that if you want. These were started under heat in heated propagators, these Rindsbergers, and they'll come good August, September time. I should be starting to lift those from sort of June, and I'll have another set that I want to start later so that they get us right through into about October before we lift them, and they will then last longest and get us into spring next year. So because I didn't plant any overwintering onions, I've had to preserve as much as we can of last season's late finish onions. So we put about 100 Rindsberger onions through the Excalibur dehydrator, and we're going to store those in clip-top jars, which fortunately we have a good supply of, because that's what we keep the dried fruit in that we eat over the winter. But that 100 onions or so is probably going to have to last us about a 3-month period, and that's going to be everything we have to have hot dogs, have hamburgers, make soups, make stews, chilies, spaghetti sauce, simply because I didn't plant any overwintering onions. Just shows the consequence of not having good succession. The next 2 beds on the plan are red and white currants here, black currants behind. I love currants. So they're netted over to save the fruit from the birds. But that has given us an advantage, because the yield on currants isn't huge. They are a great delight, they're a great pleasure, a bit of a treat, but we're not going to get hundreds and hundreds of pounds from these beds. But because they're netted, what we've done this year is we've put things like rainbow chard, spring cabbage, etc. into the beds under the net, which protects them from the cabbage white butterflies whose caterpillars would just destroy them otherwise. And what we're going to do with the rest is we're going to work in things like purple sprouting broccoli and Brussels sprouts and all the other brassicas that need protection, but we don't particularly want to spray with chemicals. Before we move down the rest of the beds on this side, let me talk about the beds that are the other orientation. These two long beds. This one we've already reduced to a fine tilth and I've sown the whole bed with parsnips. Years ago, before the potato was imported into this country, before the days of rice, before we had pasta, there were two major carbohydrate sources in the UK. One was the parsnip, the other was wheat in the form of bread. And you can get a massive yield. Here we've got 100 square foot of parsnips. You can get a huge amount there. Each will produce roots of sort of this size. They're delicious roasted to make fantastic soup. And you don't need to preserve them. You can leave them in the ground all winter long and just dig them up as you want them. Now in the far bed you'll see some green foliage, and that foliage is a few of last year's parsnips. So last year that was our parsnip bed. This year, through rotation, we've moved it up to this one, but we've left some parsnips in the ground because parsnips are biennial, and what that means is it takes them 2 years to reproduce. So these ones are in their second year, and they will put up huge flower spikes this year, 7-8 foot tall, bright yellow, look a bit like cow parsley, but yellow in colour of the flower. And that will produce enough seed, not just for us, but for all our friends and neighbours. We will get literally thousands of seeds from that small area. The rest of that bed, because it's sheltered, it's very close to the hedge line, is going to be sweet corn this year. And through the magic of time travel, that is how big a parsnip flower gets. This is the first of 3 strawberries, and I've got a bit to tell you about those. They use the same frames as the currants, but a different net. This is bird netting. So the mesh, probably 1/2 inch, 1.5 centimetres, is wide enough to let pollinating insects in, which the strawberries need, small enough to keep birds out, because the birds do love eating the strawberries. You can see the straw underneath the leaves. That's to stop the fruit, when it forms, touching down on the soil. If it does, it gets a thing called soil splash, which can lead to rot and it looks unsightly. We have got 3 beds, each a different variety, each fruits at a different time of year, so it gives us succession. Now, 300 square foot is far more strawberries than any family can eat fresh, trust me. You know, I like a strawberry as much as the next man, but a bowl that size, every day for a month, you're not going to eat them all. So why do we grow so many? They preserve brilliantly. We dry a large amount of strawberries and freeze good many more as well. And they're one of the fruits that will sustain us through the winter. As for reproducing, they do a thing called producing runners. So they put up a little stalk and have a little bundle of leaves on the end. And if you take that little bundle of leaves and touch it down in a pot of compost, peg it there, leave it for a month or so, it'll root. And you can sever the original stem and you've got a brand new strawberry plant. So these again, very easy to be self-sustaining with these, and in fact you can produce far more plants than you're ever going to need. This is another bed of alliums. It's shallots and garlic, and these have overwintered. Planting time for me for this type of shallot and the garlic, late September, early October. So easy to be self-sustaining. Every shallot you plant will result in 8 to 10 good sized ones. And what I do, once we've dried them off, so the skins are all dried and the foliage is dried back, I pick out the best, the biggest, the fattest shallots, and I keep those to replant. We won't be lifting these till sort of June, July time. So you've only actually got to keep them for about 3 months and then you replant them. Garlic, much the same. You'll get a number of bulbs, and some of them will be beautiful big fat bulbs, and from those take the big fat cloves of garlic and replant them. Always replant your best examples, not your worst. Cook your worst ones, because if you plant the weak ones you breed a weaker and weaker and weaker strain, or whatever you're planting. If you plant the best, you build a stronger, bigger, more vigorous strain. This bed's almost empty. If you look at the far end, you can see a few leeks and a few onions. The onions are there, they're Rindsberger onions, the ones I keep prattling on about. They're in their second year. We're going to let them flower, and we're going to save the seeds from those flowers, because Rindsberger are an open pollinated onion, so they breed true, and we won't need to keep buying seeds. The leeks are there because last year I did that with leeks and seed saved some, and weirdly, which I didn't know, the leeks produced extra bulbs underground, literally little tiny bulbs. Those little tiny bulbs sprouted and produced new leeks. So leeks can be propagated a bit like, almost like daffodils or like the shallots, because as well as flowering, they will produce small underground bulbs. The rest of the bed, Dutch brown beans. Plant them in May. They're a little orange bean, make brilliant baked beans, make brilliant chili beans, and they're open pollinated, so they breed true, so you keep back some of those beans, you don't have to buy more. And if you let them dry in the pods on the plant, they come out as dried beans. You can pop them into an airtight jar and save them for 3 years. This is a bed of two halves, not much to see. The darker half, I've just watered it, has carrots in it. And I'm going to make an embarrassing confession. I haven't yet seed saved carrots, so I'm using bought-in seeds for these carrots. They are tiny little fiddly seeds, carrot seeds, and it's quite a trick to seed save them well, but it's a trick I'm going to have to learn. The far end of this bed is going to be, honestly, a bit of odds and ends. We're going to put some salad in there, we're going to put some spring onions in there, we're going to put some beetroot in there, and I often think, don't plan everything in great lumps. That bed will be succession grown with lots of little odds and ends that just make dinner nicer. Next to it, there are 2 more beds of strawberries. And beyond, if you look carefully in the distance, there's Fiona cleaning a chicken drinker. If you haven't watched our video on carrot seed germination, try this as a tip. Once you've sown your carrot seed, really firm down the seed bed with a bulk of old timber. It improves our carrot seed germination no end. This is the last bed in the run of 10. Nothing in it as yet. What I am going to do is set up a frame like the ones I've shown you earlier. We're going to put insect netting over the top, and this is going to be another brassica bed. So for here, we're going to have purple sprouting broccoli, we are going to have Savoy cabbage, we're going to have Brussels sprouts, and all the other members of the cabbage family that need netting off to protect them from insects. We can get a lot of brassicas in this kind of space. Adjoining all our veg beds, which are over on that side, we've built a fruit cage. It's a very large fruit cage, and in it we have a full run of blackberries, because there aren't many wild blackberries to be picked around here, and 2 full runs of raspberries. Again, they're going to get dried, jammed, frozen, and that's going to be a lot of our winter food supply. This is the gooseberry bed. We do have a lot of other odd corner beds around this area for gooseberries. We've got an area for rhubarb, we've got an area for blueberries, and much more besides. And the gooseberries are going great guns. Come in and have a look. You can already see here the little berries starting to form on the gooseberries, but underneath there's vast numbers of them all the way down the branch. We've pruned them well so the light and air can get inside. So we're looking forward to a really good harvest of gooseberries and making gooseberry fruit leather. But as good as that harvest of gooseberries is going to be, you can see around here there are areas of wood chip that are bare. We can slide some beans or some other crops in there. You'll also notice that the ground underneath the fruit bushes is wood shavings, and that is where the bedding, complete with poop from the chickens, goes, and it gives a wonderful layer of fertiliser. So again, we can't afford to waste. This is the compost area. It's actually more of a sort of general working area at the end of the garden. The gate's just behind where you're looking at me. Friendly neighbourhood tree surgeons drop us some wood chip here. We have a vast amount of composters, and I'll show you a clip in a minute of using those composters to start our potatoes in sacks. So we're trying to produce our own compost, which means all the top growth that we don't eat, all of the kitchen waste goes into composters and gets turned into the compost that we need to plant for another year. Again, with our reduced income, we can't go out buying bags of compost at £5 a bag. So all of this is designed to produce compost. But I have to work it harder this year. So all this wood chip is going to get shoveled into a bigger pile, and all the area behind the big flat area, I'm going to put a load of pumpkins in there, and you can produce a lot of food from pumpkin plants. I've grown a single pumpkin at over 70 pounds in weight. So half a dozen in this area, and it's beautifully fertile. It's so fertile because we keep producing compost, so all the soil is wonderful. So I'm going to bung some pumpkins in, and in other areas of the garden we have areas like this, smaller, flatter areas where we normally do other tasks. I'm going to put some heritage squash in there, I'm going to put some butternut squash in there, and in other areas we'll put some bean poles, we'll grow some climbing beans, or we'll grow some low growing beans, but all these little areas have to be put to work. Let's take a quick look then at how we produce our own compost and what we use it for. This bin's been there for probably 8 or 9 months since last summer, and as you can see it's mostly produced. It has got the odd growing bulb in it, and that's fine. We just lift those out, pop them into a fresh composter, and they'll get broken down over the course of this year. But in general, everything is well rotted. So for things like potatoes, I just use it as is. And I'd like you to notice the use of the long-handled so-called Devon spade there. I'm a great believer in heavy tasks use long handles. Try and spare your back wherever you can. And this is what we end up with. And as you can see, for larger seeds, and certainly for potatoes, it's more than fine enough to use straight out of the composter. It's actually very good stuff indeed. If I'm dealing with small seeds, I do like to sieve out any large sticks or bits of stuff. And this is the kind of soil sieve that I prefer to use these days. It's got an internal spring-loaded bar, and as you push down on the handle and turn, it forces the compost through the mesh into the base and into the truck. And this is what we end up with. And as you can see, it's a really nice, fine seed compost. More than good enough for the smallest of seeds. Here's that barrow full of compost again, and I'm going to use that to grow some potatoes. Our method, and we've done a full video, I'll link to it above, is to use old feed sacks, old compost sacks, cut some drainage holes in the bottom of those sacks, roll them down, and then you can unroll them every time you want to earth up your potatoes. But to start with, a couple of cold shovels of compost in the bottom of the sack, just to give the potatoes something to sit in, and then grab a seed potato if you can get them, rub off all the eyes but 1 or 2 on the top of the seed potato, and pop it into that compost. Add a couple more shovels of your own garden compost or whatever you've got on top. And as you can see, we've done lots and lots of potatoes this year, more than I would normally do. But again, extra mouths to feed, not wanting to buy food. It's important to us to get as much of this done as we can. We're anxious to get a really good sized flock built up this year, and we've been having problems with Doodle, who's been our stud cockerel. And he had to go this week, 3 fertility tests, and he failed every single one of them. So this is Jack White, and he's our backup cockerel, and he seems very enthusiastic about his new role as being the sire of our line of chickens for this year. Now, once Jack had been in the enclosure for 7 days on his own, we've collected up some eggs and we're going to use those eggs to fertility test Jack White. And the way that we do that is to put a dozen or 14 eggs into the incubator, turn it on, run that incubator for 7 days and then look for signs of development within the eggshell. And here's one of those eggs. Can you see the dark mass and the black moving parts inside it? That's development signs. And we're certain that Jack White managed to achieve full fertility on at least 12 of the 14 eggs. It's a good job that Jack White was fertile, because within a few days of doing that test, Cinnamon went broody. And here she is. We've separated her into her own little broody coop. You can see a drinker and a feeder behind her. We do like to give them a couple of days closed in the coop to settle there. And then we put a run on the outside with their own feeder and drinker in it. And that's more to stop other hens coming in bothering the broody than it is to keep the broody inside. Because other hens tend to want to disturb her nest, lay their own eggs in them, even though that nest is full of half incubated eggs. A week after Cinnamon went broody, Cindy went broody too, and I thought we'd show you the process of moving a broody hen. So Fiona is making a lovely deep nest in some clean bedding for Cindy, and then she's opening up this broody coop ready to receive her. She's going to collect Cindy from the trailer coop where she's gone broody, and we leave some pot eggs in the trailer coop and the main coop so that any hen that goes broody will sit on them and get attached to them. So what Fiona's doing is collecting not only Cindy but also the warm pot eggs that Cindy thinks are her clutch, and she's going to take them both over to the broody coop that we've settled on, pop the warm eggs in and Cindy on top. You can see she's got feed and water there on the left, and we'll leave her closed in overnight and she'll adopt this coop as her new home and have her clutch in it. Once we're sure the chicken's taken to a new coop, we need to swap the pot eggs for some real ones. The easiest way to achieve that is to let her out into the run and give her a few treats just to keep her there. And while she's busily engaged, Fiona can nip in the back hatch of the coop, take out the pottery eggs and put in some real ones that we've collected on previous days. Now, a Buff Orpington hen will sit on 12 to 18 eggs quite happily and hatch them. But this year, we're only going to give our broody hens 6 eggs to sit on initially. On the same day that we put the 6 eggs under the hen, we'll take all the additional eggs that we have available, mark them with that hen's initials and pop them into the incubator. Then, after 7 days, we can candle them, remove any that aren't viable and assemble as big a clutch of eggs that we know are likely to hatch as is possible. And that way, we can get our hatch rates up as high as we possibly can, which is really important to us this year. Generally, we let all the broodies out every day or 2 days, and the one thing they seem to really enjoy is a sand bath. So when we want to add the eggs, we'll let them out, let them have a bit of a roll in the sand bath, and while they're out, it gives us the opportunity to sneak additional eggs into their clutch, and if we need to, we can also use this process to candle the eggs they're already sat on and swap out any that are infertile or not developing properly. And this way, this year, we can ensure that we get really good hatch rates. That's just a few of the things we're trying to do to get through the COVID-19 lockdown, to compensate for our loss of income and to ensure that we stay healthy and well fed.
If you've enjoyed this type of content, just take a moment to give us a thumbs up below. If you've got any questions for us, leave us a comment and we'll get back to you. If you would subscribe to the channel and click the notifications icon, you'll hear of any new videos as soon as they're posted. Thanks for watching.
Take care of yourselves. Let us know how you're getting on and whatever you do. Come back and see us soon. Take care.